Let's do some character work, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so to kind of put it where I'm seeing it is that there are habits of making champions characters that I know really well, and that one thing I do or learned to do was to kind of step away from the habits. And if anybody really wants to stick with one of them, then making sure they really want to do it and it's not just a habit. One of the
Sure.
things that I've been pushing is the idea that you're working the character from three corners. Um,
Okay.
one of the corners is to go with everything about them as kind of a person, all the intangibles, all the if it's a human being growing up on the planet and everything, then you say, okay, well, what's their job, you know, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Is their mother still alive or whatever? Do they did their car just get, repoed, or do they have four of them? So all that stuff. And then the other one is kind of very much the sort of power set, super imagery, splash page or full page ad coming soon look, of what on earth this character looks like, does, that we know of.
Most of the stuff,
And then, yeah,
probably most people think of
right.
when they
And
think
then
of
there's the
champions
third
character, the
part, which
powers.
is
Yeah.
characters' problems. What's
Okay.
kind of interesting, it sounds like they map to no points, positive points, disadvantage points, but they kind of don't.
Hmm.
A lot of those things sort of crisscross across the corners or hook up across the corners in in ways that are completely customized. But you can kind of go with, I mean, doing that isn't too far off from those.
Sure.
Um, One of the things that you were kind of working off of was kind of, it's kind of as if you were going from talking about the powers, but talking about the intangibles as to try to, say, I can have these powers because of these intangibles. When he was in the military, got this suit. So let's just kind
Sure.
of say, okay, whatever it is he's got, we're going to accept how he got it. I mean, it'll be part of it,
Okay.
but we don't have to like suffer. Um,
We don't have to justify
yeah,
everything.
yeah. Thinking in terms of an artist sketching, actually, so the artist is like, do
Right?
they really care about all that stuff when they're like drawing the cool thing? You know.
Yeah.
So the the analogy is actually pretty good. So if we look at sort of the working imagery we've got some kind of military grade exoskeletal device, perhaps. If we're going with that, those descriptions of powers that we were talking about, with the what, so the statements are just sort of where we always go to. Statement number one about powers are all about determination and effort and practice. In this game that we're going to
Mhm.
play, there aren't going to be any powers that you just get. Oh, I know,
Sure.
I have cosmic blasts. It's going to be, this is something that the person has to work at. They have to maintain, to perfect, to strive for, to, everybody's got to work out. It's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
And of course, that raises the interesting question: what about the villain who doesn't? That's cool, but we'll just hold off on that. That's note to self, GM note to self: villain who doesn't, right? So then we also have the other statement, which had to do with sort of the people's thing, and I actually lifted a line from Bob Dylan. To live outside the law, you must be honest. And so that implies lots of things. I mean, so first things first, note that we're not talking about super cops. People who work with Commissioner Gordon, who catch crooks and drop them off at police stations. Oh, Batman traumatized a guy.
Okay.
Guess we better book him. I mean, we don't. It's
Yeah.
so we're whatever it is though, but that leaves it wide open. It's basically anything else.
Okay.
Um, so so with that in mind, uh, where do we go? I mean, do you want to go to a corner that's more about the person, where we're talking about like the determination? What do they look like? I mean, You know those sketches that artists do of the face from all the different angles and different expressions, like a page sketch that they'll
Yeah,
just do of all these faces. What kind of
yeah.
look are we talking about? What kind of, the artist is kind of working out the person as almost as if they were an actor at that point.
Okay. I guess the image I have in my head is kind of a generic white guy, military, uh, clean cut, short hair, um, kind of somewhere between stocky and muscular. I'm just thinking of guys I served with, just kind of going with that sort of basic look.
Right, right. That kind of thick,
Um,
powerful look that some of them have. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm seeing a military fatigues in my head. Just a battle dress uniform. I'm thinking of the green and brown camo from the '80s, but
Right. Hmm.
if we're talking more modern, it's
That kind of
whatever
sand
they're
and
wearing
gray
these
kind
days.
of thing they got going. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Now,
Um,
okay,
as far as the appearance goes, I don't have much beyond that.
that's good. But that's not bad because there are a couple of things that come to mind. One
Mhm.
thing I'm really pushing is this is where those intangibles are like found. I mean, where things like this are found in other places besides the no point zone. One thing I'm pushing is about psychological limitations.
Mhm.
Looking it over and being real legalistic about the way they write them and trying to get away from all the habits we developed about them. And one of the interesting points is that it has nothing to do with the content of the psychological limitation. You could have a person who's a
Okay.
vegetarian and you could have a person who's a serial killer. And they're worth the
Okay.
same amount of points as such. It has nothing to do with the content. The only thing that matters is how often, or likely, more accurately, how likely is it for somebody to challenge it? And that could be like a positive challenge, like an opportunity,
Sure.
or it could be a negative challenge, like someone criticizes it or misrepresents it or something like that. So
Mhm.
how likely is that kind of challenge? And
Sure.
then the other one is what's your response? Is your response ordinary, irrational,
Mhm.
or meltdown? And I remember a lot of people picking meltdown for the highest points, and they were thinking like what they were really thinking was berserk. But meltdown, if you look at it, means the character becomes useless. So it's actually incompatible with berserk and enrage. So
Yeah.
so let's sticking with the psychological advantages. We got ordinary reaction, you know, some sort of, again, irrational is kind of an interesting term because it's like attack the villain who threatened my friend. You're like, well, how irrational is that? Well,
Mhm.
maybe it's irrational. It's very case by case. You're just
Yeah.
sort of going with the player and saying you're ready to be irrational about this, right? And the player says on it, and you're like, okay, we'll see where that goes. So with that in mind, if the character has an opinion about his service history,
Mhm.
whether it's resentful and toward whom, and I can think of three things right off the bat. I can think of resentful toward the designated enemy, resentful
Mhm.
toward the U.S. public, and I could think of
Mhm.
resentful toward the service itself instead, right? So anyway,
Uh,
so what
yeah.
I'm just it doesn't even have to be resentful, but I'm just pointing out the breadth or
So,
the
as an
breadth that we
example.
have
Yeah.
to mess with. Um, and so then, so whatever it is, let's go back to the vegetarian and the serial killer, right? You say, okay, how
Sure.
often does the vegetarian get their attitude or their opinion sort of challenging answers? Quite a bit. Every time they go shopping, there's pork chops right there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole culture of eating meat. And it's not quite as bad as being pregnant and having people walk up and rub your belly who you don't even know, but it is pretty common that someone's gonna figure, well, if you're a vegetarian, then you must be interested in my opinion about it. And I'm not even speaking as being particularly sympathetic toward vegetarianism. I just figured, I just know that people who are, this is what they deal, right? Their choice, but
Yeah.
that's the deal. So common provocation, common challenge, whatever. And then, so how irrational are we talking about? Is our vegetarian about to take a poke at somebody, who calls them, calls them what are you going to do? So I
Granola
don't know.
eating
Somebody says
hippie.
something obnoxious. Are they going to take a swing at them?
Yeah.
Are they going to go off on them and like disrupt family dinner in their diatribe? Are they going to? I mean, anything irrational, anything that just says, okay, social norms are out the window. You just, coming at you now for whatever in
Right.
some whatever way, or or maybe goes off and like empties their bank account to go and like put into some fund for
Right.
but because that person irritated them, maybe they aren't violent, they just go and they empty their bank account into the fund. Irrational stuff. um do they break down like sobbing or flee or lose it entirely and become completely dysfunctional? um so those are kind of the choices.
Okay.
And I one thing I'm finding is that when a lot of people talk about psychological limitations, when you ask them about this, what they really want is 15 points for common with no special reaction. They don't want to play those reactions. They want to play their character being cool. The sky is the limit at that point. I mean, you can if you're not interested in somebody being, kind of idiotic or useless, then you can pick anything you want as a psychological limitation, as long as it's something that other people may well have an opinion about. Um, and
Okay.
so it's kind of interesting. I mean, that means like Batman's, as I said in one of the videos, Batman's hatred of gun violence is just 15 points. No, he doesn't get 30 because he hates it more than I do, right? And so then I
Sure. Yeah.
remember doing that. I was like, oh, this guy really hates it. 25 points. And that's that. And I'm looking
Yeah.
at the rules and I'm like, that's funny. It doesn't say anything about that. We just got in the habit of just racking up the points because the person was,
Yeah.
totally determined. Um,
Sure.
yeah. So it's kind of it raises other interesting questions. Is overconfident even a limitation if it's not irrational?
Hmm.
I mean,
That's a
then
good
otherwise
point.
you're just ready to be in an action-packed story, which is what everybody is. So, I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where things get debatable and table-oriented and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm real tired of like overconfident 20 points, code versus killing 20 points, 40 points done, and then the player never thinks about those things ever again.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm getting at with all this. If we look at this guy, maybe what we need is that kind of an anchor. Another kind of anchor you might think of is economic. You know, is he completely estranged? Is he, basically looking at that 7-Eleven and kind of wondering whether it's more important than him this week? Or are we talking about somebody who's more well placed and sort of in a more elective situation about this whole power situation?
Okay.
Um,
Well, I know being a former military guy, having just gotten out, wondering what you're going to do to keep body and soul together. Um, Wondering how your skills are going to translate when your skills, are military specialized. It wasn't so much in my case; mine were fairly transferable. But when your skills are, breaking things and killing people, what can you do in the civilian world?
well, not only that, but in 2018, the wealth of opportunity afforded you is slim, right?
Yeah.
Um, so uh, so okay, well, you given some of those things, in a kind of scritchy notish form, then we can sort of look at the different corners. I mean, we're getting sort of an idea of the appearance. We're getting sort of an idea. You brought up the issue of sort of this uncertainty about what to do. and a sense of disconnection from the way life goes.
Yeah.
Um, and then you also have this. It's kind of funny. I mean, the powers in this case kind of they're not going to snap together unless we get some of that other stuff together, are they?
Right.
And powered armor is kind of like that. Unless you have the person in your mind, which, like in the case of Iron Man, they said easy, Errol Flynn, you know,
Yeah.
and they said, okay, well, Errol Flynn, or at least the media image of him as the rich playboy. Interestingly enough, arms sales, kind of being on their minds. They got that together, and they're like, okay, now we can talk about powered armor.
Okay.
Um, and there's a lot going on with that. I mean, I can't really speak to the creator's literal process, but they've talked about it a little bit. And one of the things that seems real clear is they thought about the hero who has everything on paper. At first glance, okay, this guy's rich, he's handsome, he's not,
Mhm.
traumatized. He's not Bruce Wayne. He doesn't like wake up in cold sweats and sit up in the middle of the night and put on his bat suit and jump out the window, right? He
Sure.
uh he's got everything, and he's got this great armor that he made himself, you know, fantastic. Oh, by the way, he's a heart patient, and unlike every other superhero, he puts his life at risk by showing up.
Okay.
So you can see what I'm saying, that the
Mhm.
actual nature of the fact that it's armor, and you would think that he
Mhm.
could take it off and put it on and not have to worry about it,
Sure. But in his
is
case, it's
right. Right.
it's keeping him alive.
Yeah. And so you have this. So I'm saying that the character doesn't make any sense unless you got all three corners going. Every
Okay.
corner. I mean, and there's no way you made up, like, you didn't make them up in isolation. There's a brainstorm
Right.
process going on. So
Yeah.
so for the guy we're talking about, that brainstorm process starts to. I mean, every time you feel a little stalled on one of them, just jump to a different corner. Okay, well,
Okay.
let's just jump to Power's Corner. Let's just go there. Let's be the artist
Okay.
now, sketching him using the power. And
Okay.
the cool thing, of course, is that again, the sky's the limit. I mean, he doesn't have to be Iron Man. This stuff could this thing he's got. Uh,
Mhm.
what is it? Is it just augmenting human activity, like the typical sort of exoskeleton?
Yeah, it's what I'm thinking is just kind of the basic human augmentation. It's not really, Iron Man, flying around and shooting blasts. It's more um think of like the powered loader from Aliens, kind of shrunken down to a more human form. Um it's armored because the guys wearing them are intended to go into combat. There's sensory and communications gear because that's what they're intended for. There's a little bit of extra strength because you don't necessarily need guys to be able to lift and throw a tank, but you don't want them to be stopped up by wreckage or
Right.
you know a barricade made of
Now,
cars.
one of the things that I talked about was, given the way that we had defined the powers for the game, is that
Hmm.
if it requires that degree of determination in order to work right,
Hmm.
then it's not really something that they're going to continue to develop.
Sure.
Boeing made its money, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And the project went this far, and everybody called it a win and went home, right?
Sure.
Sort of the and so
And that could very well be this case too. It could be something that they want to use to make DoD promotional videos that they can show the brass and the
absolutely, the
executives to get
Congress
a
will
lot of
love it.
money.
Congress will love it. It's
Yeah.
10 years later, if somebody says, "Hey, whatever happened to that armor?" everyone will shush them, because that's bad form in the military.
Yeah.
In the bid
Yeah.
for the next budget, right? So
Yeah.
so we've got this kind of, okay. That's still like the military's point of view. What about
Sure.
his, right?
Um, his point of view. I guess to go a little bit more with the military's point of view, what I had in mind was they don't just give these out to anybody.
Yeah, seriously.
There's a heavy duty selection process to get in. People have to be dedicated and disciplined and trained. If you're not, this thing can break your arm, or it can immobilize you in the middle of a battle.
Yeah, my take is that's probably the default. I mean, we're talking about the one guy who's reliably able to do otherwise.
Sure.
Now, let's take it to the superhero.
Okay.
Are we talking about somebody who now has this thing, possibly without, the military hierarchy knowing that he has it or wanting him to have it?
Right.
And is he and using it kind of for purposes of his own? And since this whole live outside the law thing is what's going on, obviously he's not doing this under orders.
Right.
He is not the designated op agent for the use of this.
Right.
So that's what I mean by the artist drawing it. What's he doing? If we see the guy in action, what's he doing?
Okay. That's a good point. I don't think I had gotten quite that far.
Yeah, that's kind of where okay, so that's sort of a stall out on the powers, though. You know what I mean? That's kind of interesting because it's actually more important to have that image in your head of what they're doing with their powers against what, kind of vaguely, It's more important to have that than it is to have these long backstories of, I like the guy who died that you talked about in the little discussion, but he's actually less important pound for pound.
Okay.
Well, then we can go to sort of the disadvantages again. I mean, if he is doing this without the military, without being like a military thing, pretty much hunted by that program, or is kind of important, or or even if you really want to go full bull goose loony on this, and this would be kind of dangerous. This is almost making him like a villain in society's eyes if you wanted to go that far. Then we're talking about somebody who Homeland Security knows who he is, which if you do that, we're talking about a game defining quality, which is fine. But you only want to do that if that's what you want everything's going to be about.
I don't know that that's what I want.
Right. Well, that's fine. I'm just kind of giving you the edge case of how far you want to push that outlawry.
Sure.
But the idea being that if he's using this more or less on his own hook, then there's something that he very much wants to accomplish. There's got to be. There's got to be something he knows about, something he was involved with, something that he learned about, or anything of the sort that he's got to want to stop. He put this thing on. He could hang it up. I mean, he didn't. We're kind of assuming that he has it. You mentioned like a lieutenant who got it to him or something like that, and that's fine, right? That works. But they're up to something, the two of them.
Maybe the lieutenant is up to something, and this guy is up to something else.
That's okay too. Yeah.
Or somebody at the top has an agenda. They're not exactly letting him have it, but there's kind of an unofficial thread going from him to upper brass.
And they're keeping an eye on this. They want something to come out of this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that like automatically gives us our first disadvantage, which is hunted.
Right.
And you'll notice that I rewrote the hunteds to, instead of having them be about it being how common they are. So instead, I said, let's make it based on what they want. Either they want to manipulate, it's never good, but either they want to manipulate the character and make them do what they want in some way that isn't what the character wants, as far as we know. Or second, they want to ruin the character up to and including killing them. They want the character destroyed in some way. So here, manipulative seems to follow. And then the other part of the hunted is how big they are in the U.S. Well, this isn't like the whole U.S. military. They can't mobilize the National Guard on him. you know.
Right.
Um, but so we're talking about probably, a small group that's very powerful. They've got some serious resources, and whatever the numbers come up to, it's probably pretty high. Probably pretty good,
Yeah.
solid, a value. So there we go. Okay, we got that. And so that means he probably, or the lieutenant guy, probably um,
The
conveys,
lieutenant guy's
hmm?
the lieutenant guy. He's more like almost like a pawn in this.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah,
He's with the side of the guy. He doesn't necessarily know what the superiors upstairs are planning or thinking. He you know it he knows that he's responsible for X number of these suits, and one of them is in the hands of this guy
and it's
because it was
probably,
his
as I
suit.
keep harping on, is probably the only one that they're pretty sure is working. The only one
Yeah,
where the whole package is operative. Right.
yeah,
Right.
and that kind of gets into an idea I've often had about superpowered gadgeteers is, why this guy? Well, it's not just a gadget. It's something about this guy, his powers, his super ability is to work with this suit. It works extremely well for him, maybe not as well for others.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, that seems perfectly reasonable to me. And furthermore, given that whole determination thing, maybe we can start thinking a little bit about numbers.
Okay.
Um, I've been really looking hard at what ego does. And there's one thing
Mm-hmm.
that ego does that I really wish that I had used more back when, and now am using more in play, which is that for the ultimate push, because you can
Mm-hmm.
push voluntarily this much and get these many more
Sure.
points. But if you want to do everything you possibly have, that's when the result
Mm-hmm.
becomes random. And you
Yeah.
have to make an ego roll to do it. Think in terms of this guy. I mean, having the willpower to be somebody that we can think of as, what? This guy actually can power into those high realms of push. This is something he can do, you know?
Okay.
So all of a sudden we're looking at, a higher ego value than one might think of for this kind of character.
Yeah.
Um,
That's well, having been in the military. I mean, you have to have. It's not just building up your physical body. It's you have to have willpower to get through it.
oh, sure.
It's not
Yeah.
not for the weak of heart or the
Well,
weak of
and
mind.
right.
It's
And again, we're talking about in this case a character who is exceptional in some regard in this way as
yeah.
well. So okay, we're thinking about other things. I mean, does that mean a lot of the people you're talking about, and you can tell me if this is different from your opinion. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people of the sort that I've met along these lines have a low affect. That which means
Yeah.
that yeah, they're not demonstrative people. They're not,
Right.
they're not going to dominate a
That
room.
that
Um,
that exactly matches.
so in that case, we're not talking about high presence, but perhaps presence defense.
Sure.
Yeah. So now we're kind of getting a little bit of the powers to kind of put the person together a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you already wrote some things. Now we also talked a little bit about the augmentation, but augmentation is one thing. There should be some
Mm-hmm.
kind of power that's really fun to draw too.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be like a 20 things. In fact, what with Iron Man running around in the movies, we've all known that if you got powered armor, it's also got the Mitsubishi of dashboard controls too.
Yeah.
Right. Let's never mind that. Right. We're talking about something more like for it to be. I've always liked the idea of Kalashnikov tech. You know, it
About what?
Kalashnikov tech. It freaking works.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It
yeah,
it freaking works. What else does it do?
yeah,
Nothing. There are
yeah,
no options. Um,
yeah. It's The option is you can dig it out of the mud where
That's
it's been
right.
buried for 6 months and it will
Yeah,
shoot.
exactly
But
correct.
you
Yeah,
know,
the thing it
it's
works,
nothing
and
else.
quit asking stupid questions.
Yeah,
How long is the manual? What manual? Here, do this, and do the other thing.
yeah.
There is no manual. So
You're writing the manual.
yeah. So with so with the with that in mind, and not necessarily going all the way with that, but with that in mind, therefore we got to think of something that this stuff does that really is it's unique. It's more than just an augmented person. As you can see, this can be kind of laborious, and if we're going to go point by point like this, it's going to take us all night. But
Sure.
I'm going to claim that if you go ahead and commit to some visual effects with a signature power or two, you see that's
Okay.
the other cool thing is that no no really good power is actually just a power plucked out of the list. It's actually, a couple
Yeah.
things, one
Yeah.
way or another. And then we have to start thinking about
Yeah.
so thinking away from the augmentation. And hey,
Sure.
it's not going to be like a weapon in a gun sense because he's going to be holding one in the military, right? So that don't worry
Yeah.
about that either. We're talking about something
Right.
that this stuff does that's actually in the spooky zone.
Okay. Here's an idea. He has some kind of like crackling energy aura that this is what makes what's differentiated him from all the other guys who's wearing it. When he's in the zone, it's almost like he's got like a, the classic comic book energy aura, and um, nobody knows why. He doesn't even know he's doing it, but other people see it.
Right, right. Okay, couple things. Number one, there's nothing wrong with energy blast damage shield.
Sure.
Number two, there's any number of interesting effects that we could put on there. One is that it could have extra. I mean, think about a damage shield that has extra knockback,
Okay.
or the fact that if he does focus it into some kind of maneuver, that something else happens. So something goes off or is achieved, or so there's some other effect
Mm-hmm.
when he does a particular combat maneuver that he's good at.
Okay.
Is he good at you know I don't know, martial throw? I don't know, something.
Maybe some kind of, maybe like a takedown move, like a
Yeah,
sleeper hold or something.
yeah. So a grab, perhaps. If he gets a grab on you, then the effect, then it's like a different attack. There's the one thing, and then there's also a different attack that comes in some way.
Yeah.
And I would advise you to think a little out of the beaten path and look around for powers and stuff that aren't stereotypical fighty guy. Something
Okay.
something offbeat in regard to the
Okay.
power set here. And there's also the fun of names. The word aura,
Yeah.
comes to mind in some way. I don't know. It might be a little intellectual as like a super name, but on the
Mm-hmm.
other hand, as like a military operations name or something code named for him because he's got this quality, you know.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's what the military calls him, aura. Or they're, how people refer to operations as if they were people. Like
Yeah.
how's Canary going? Well, Canary's going like this. We got this acid,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. How's Aura going? Well, he did this. So it's kind of like they're talking about the person, but also they're talking about the operation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that is sounds very much like how they would think of him as, he's an asset.
yeah,
He's not necessarily a person. Yeah. Thinking of like a little bit like the Bourne movies, where I like to joke about how there's like a federal department of Jason Bourne who's, giant bureaucracy whose sole purpose is to keep tabs on Jason Bourne.
right, right.
But
The in this
not quite that extensive in this case.
No,
But
this
yeah.
one's a little more conspiratorial. Well, that's conspiratorial too, but this one's a little more like textbook conspiratorial. But
Yeah.
but with that in
Free guide.
mind, therefore it becomes, now we're starting to see a little more context for this. The artist
Yeah.
just drew a cool picture, right, of whatever
Yeah.
of whatever, And and we've also sort of said, huh, we're kind of looking at the powers in this more kind of psychological, energetic way
Yeah.
than just like what the clinky clanky armor, quote does, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool. Um, there's something like what I did with my example character when you start tying certain powers to psychological limitations or other things
Hmm.
in the disadvantages. A really good example is, I take double damage from this. I'm vulnerable to X, but I have a power that goes off if I'm hit by X, or that
Hmm.
is accessible when I'm hit by X. Okay, you know, all of a sudden, instead of, oh, I hope I'm never hit with that, it's going to do extra damage, you're like, bring it on. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
taking it in the teeth. Yeah, this is going to suck and it's going to be awesome, you know.
Yeah.
So that's where I want you to kind of start thinking about, with the way the powers
All
and the
right.
personalities start going together. Um, because there's a lot of potential here for in a character like this. Because we still don't quite have I mean, unless he's just a slab of beefcake, he's got his notions
That's
about what to do with this that I trust we're going to find sympathetic as audience.
yeah.
And that's kind of where we're
That's the
falling
idea.
down a little bit, is what's his stake in this?
Yeah.
How come the dudes up top aren't getting their way? Because if they were, they wouldn't be a hunted.
Right. Right.
Right? So there that's where we start thinking, and the very fact that we're asking that question at all means we're actually thinking about a champion's character.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we've got
Right.
the lieutenant guy sounds like he would be fun to play, because he's, as you say, he's kind of in betwixt and between. He kind of does sympathize with our guy, so he could be fun to
Mhm.
play one way or the other, in terms of the guy's best interest. And that's what a
Yeah.
DNPC is good for, right?
Yeah.
A DNPC is supposed to make your life complicated, or in a good way, I hope.
Yeah.
I'm trying to rehabilitate the DNPC in a big way as a concept.
Yeah.
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 And the key is that it's somebody that the game master wants to play. That's the key. They look at them, they
Yeah.
go, "Ooh, that person's going to be fun to play." That's going to be, they're going to make decisions. They're going to they're going to have a point of view. And I kind of like,
Yeah.
one thing that I'm really working on, especially in the games that I'm running right now, is let's not make them irritating. Let's have
Yeah.
if the dependent non-player character is there, it's not because they show up, they open the door and say, "Oh my goodness, Dr. Eviscerator. Darns. Oops, sorry." It's
Yeah.
more like, no, they were there in the first place, is kind
Yeah.
of the better way to look at it, and also that you might sort of want them to achieve what it is they did, instead of saying, irritating reporter with no self-defense skills just
The
wandered into
battlefield.
that area, again. Instead, it's
Yeah.
more
I
like,
have to
no, you're
go
working
through
on
this
a
down
story that I
again.
believe in, and I'm glad you're working on it, and you actually went sensibly.
Yeah.
Okay, now you get in trouble. I am gonna rescue you because you don't suck. That's actually kind of what
Yeah.
I'm aiming at. So the lieutenant guy definitely goes in the NPC. A good way to do this now is to think at right angles. What about a character that the hero, cares about? And not like cares about, of, oh, I better keep them out of my life, and every time the GM puts them
Yeah.
in, I'm going to shove them away. But who do I care about, in the sense that I will proactively engage with this person?
Okay.
Um, and what's nice about situations like that is we can kind of get out of the backstory and have this be something that's coming from a completely different angle.
Sure.
So, so that's something to keep in mind. Uh, if you said that he's not very self-aware about his powers. He's probably figured out that he's got something going on by now. But the point, though, is that he is not. And he has to cultivate them. Remember, he's been
Yeah.
trying to cultivate it. Well, if you're dealing with things that you're trying to cultivate, there's a lot of unknowns there. This is opening up the range of susceptibility, dependency, vulnerability. in some way. The things we all hate, but like I said, you tie cool power to it, and we don't hate him anymore.
Yeah.
And so there's that. Now, pretty clear that we're going with a secret identity, correct? I mean, even
Yes,
though
absolutely.
the handlers or the would-be handlers know who he is. Actually, that's an interesting point. I just thought of something. What if the
You can have a
lieutenant
secret.
actually hasn't copped to which one of his dudes that he is?
Hmm.
So that way, his secret identity is kind of protected, even from the people who know he exists.
Oh.
So that's a pretty cool secret identity. Lots of ways for that
Yeah.
to go wrong. I mean, the lieutenant would know who he is, but he's kind of protecting him a little bit.
It's like, no, General, I don't know where this power suit went. I guess I'll just have to keep looking for it.
Well, there's that one, or saying, "Oh yes, I've got six agents. One of them is operative. You know, I've got all the
Yeah.
information. Here are the reports." And in practicing deniability, he's not saying who is which one, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. If we're what we're really missing, what's a big huge hole in this is, again, his stake in these things, what he's wanting to accomplish with it, and how that's a problem for
Okay.
him. And for the guy to be actually admirable, it probably should be something that you and I kind of like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And that's where the other hunted is just sitting there looking at us. That's where the other potential hunted is just like, over here, over here. You want another
Yeah.
angle on this guy, something to admire, something that the military probably doesn't want him to do. I'm over here for him to deal with. Bring him to me, whoever that is. And so the cool thing is that all the player has to do, you can come up with a concept if you want to. That's fine. Or you could just come up with a cool name,
Yeah.
kick it to me, and I'm like, oh, okay. But you would have to, but again, since we want this to be something that we admire about the character in terms of their efforts toward this hunter person,
Mhm.
the player should probably come up with something that the player finds worth doing. What would, and to go with our themes, there's no way that law enforcement has anything to do with taking out this kind of character, this kind of menace.
Right.
Either they're just not on the radar of societal organization. Like, no, I don't know. There's no, there's if he's a being from dimension N, then okay, you know. But the idea being that dealing with this character cannot really have anything to do with what we think of as social norms of criminal hunting,
Right.
right? So, and again, this is kind of where you get to think about it. The whole idea, if the GM starts throwing things at you and you just dutifully write one down, we lost the character right there. We lost him. Because then from that point on, when you have your character do anything, it's going to be because I say, aren't you going to do anything about, Dr. Eviscerator today? And you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And I'm playing your character. You're not playing your
Yeah.
character.
Yeah.
So this is where, in a lot of ways, making up a good villain or two, even if just by name, for your character, in some
Yeah.
ways is actually more important than all that digging into the into the backstory.
That's kind of a thing I like to do is I may not know what it represents, but I'd like to put like an evocative name down on
Oh yeah,
on the disadvantages.
goes a
Like with
long way.
the
I highly remember that way. It does half of the cast building too.
yeah, like with Green Stick, I put his hunted was the Shining Fist of Nostradamus,
There you go.
um, an organization of supers. I don't know anything about them, but it's a cool name,
But you know
and
that
a
if I were the
GM can do
GM, would
something
go
with it.
dancing through the pastures, scribbling, in my book.
Yeah,
So, yeah, it's a big deal actually. Well, okay. So is this kind of coming together in terms of the corners, and you kind of get the idea that when you kind of stall a little on one corner, you just hop to another one and work it a little
yeah,
further, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, of course, and then run back and write in a power after all or
yeah,
something, right?
yes,
The
yeah,
interconnections that I've tried to highlight, which is that you can make powers and disadvantages weave together. and that things that you don't pay points for, for example, the military background and the skills involved, we don't have to pay any
Yeah.
points for that stuff. The ones we want to, like maybe martial arts, whatever the ones you kind of want to grab from that very short list. But the ones that are not on that list, that's okay.
He doesn't have to pay points for knowing how to march or knowing military procedures or,
Absolutely.
you
Or
know,
knowing a ton of
knowing
people
how to
from
stand
from
16.
there, or anything like that. And this is actually very important for this character, comes to mind. Very
Mhm.
important. Blue collar or white collar background.
I was thinking blue collar.
If you want to go that
Uh,
route, that's fine. I mean, in many ways, that's kind of the old, the go-to, and that way that works. But now we're really looking at somebody who took a choice to go do this service, and now it's a very interesting question as to whether he may have realized that he has another choice right now about that.
yeah,
He has another choice, and we're interested in his choices. This is somebody
yeah,
who, so maybe his decision to go into the military in the first place wasn't just, he got dazzled at the recruiter during high school, and ran off and joined up, but rather was a
yeah,
very carefully considered decision on his part. There were a lot of reasons not to go.
right. And
And I mean, if you want to
I
even
remember
take
having,
his age and count back on your fingers, if you want to pick the year, and I bet by
yeah,
year you would have a unique profile of reasons not to go, given our
yeah,
last 20 years of history. So
yeah,
therefore, you could say, okay, but he did, and he did so in a very thoughtful way, not beefcake, not a Yahoo, not just
right.
a recruit. Now he's going to apply that kind of thinking again. Now we're on to
Yeah,
something. Now we're, whatever it is you come up for that stuff, Project Aura suddenly became mighty interesting.
yeah. I remember actually making those kinds of decisions when I was 17 and it was the summer between my junior and senior year, and I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I had to think about, you know, what do I want to do once I'm in the military? What do I want my job to be? How long do I want to be in? Am I really equipped to make this decision? Do I know what I'm getting myself in for?
Yeah. Well, so that's these are all things to tap into, and also, of course, you can make up with a fictional character. You can make up either different answers or perhaps a different
Yeah,
context for that question that
yeah, yeah.
is, interesting to think about. Looking back on those 70s comics in particular, the ethnic, economic coding for each character was so profound, so good, so thorough.
Yeah.
Peter Parker really was from Queens. You said kind of almost generic looking white guy, but we all know that's just an appearance.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
whatever you come up with for that doesn't necessarily have to be the be all and the end all, but it always
Sure.
adds just a nice little stamp. Powers wise, we talked about the levels of concept of focus.
Hmm.
Um, how much of the powers are focus and how much aren't they? And again, that's kind of up to you. But the logic I'm using, and it's something that I'm been hoping to talk to people about, is that being an object doesn't make your thing a focus,
Right.
but
Right.
and being an object, even if it's not a focus, means that special effects sometimes mean it could be taken away or not work. That the
Yeah.
special effects will do that. Calling it an object
Yeah.
means that can happen. Period. No points.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way I like to look at it, focus means you don't say it can be taken away. Now you know it will be.
It
Some
will
way,
be.
one
Yeah.
way or another. If it's in it, if if it's inobvious and inaccessible, that just means that it's going to be taken away in a very specific way,
Yeah.
and so, but it will be. And I like what you said about how Superman was way more interesting when you take away half his powers or all of them once in a
Yeah.
while. And
Yeah.
so I kind of like that. So it's kind of an interesting idea. We could kind of flip it around and say the aura is the most reliable part, and like certain basic elements of the exoskeleton are in great shape, right? But then other parts are like maybe accessible to a grab, or other parts are, somehow, it could be like an inobvious accessible, which I think is an underused focus definition.
Yeah.
Because it means they have to think about it and notice it in order to figure it out. A good way to do that is actually thinking about find weakness. Somebody's got find weakness, and like part of find weakness is recognizing, that piece comes off.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so making a few things that are like that, but not all of it, is, that's all right. That's a cool thing. Um, and it keeps the fun of it being armor without that huge kludge on the points, and then nothing ever happens to it because then you can't play.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a
Well, one idea for accessibility is yeah, maybe it can be damaged. It's not necessarily something that someone will grab and take away from you, but you
right.
take a hit.
Accessible means just in terms of being not working, or you can't have
Yeah.
it. So it could be, yeah.
Like, so, your hit, red lights go on in your heads up display and something doesn't work.
Right.
So it's, yeah. Or
there's one thing that I don't
I
have
know,
in the rules, because all I have in that document are modifications of the rules. I don't have anything new in there. And I've got plenty new in my
right.
head or in my notes. And one of them
Yeah.
are disadvantages that are modifications that are different from vulnerabilities. They're powers that go off and hit you under different circumstances. So you're flashed, and you've decided what this is. No, I take an ego attack when this happens.
Yeah.
And it's probably nothing special, 20 points worth or something, nothing too dreadful. In fact, the amount of the disadvantage could probably be just the active points of the effect. And which is very logical, actually. And you just state the circumstances under which, zap. And it's not like the other guy has to have that power. This is.
Yeah.
But I hope this was kind of fun and just showing you, I already said it. You've got to look at, where to keep going, and you're no longer filling things in to fill in the slot, right?
Right. This was definitely helpful, and I enjoyed our conversation.
I liked it. It was fun.
Yeah.